I'll be honest, I forgot what possessed me to take up this particular challenge this week. It feels like I just started doing it as a simple exercise, and then my brain went, now what if you do this every day for a week? And some other part of my brain went, challenge accepted. The challenge I speak of is this. Open Google Earth, find a spot in the Street View that looks nice, and paint it in your art program of choice. Sounds simple enough. I added an extra layer of challenge to my challenge, though. After last week's epiphany regarding how traditional artists need to be far more intentional with their choices since it's harder to undo those mistakes, I added these limitations. First, each painting only gets one layer. I don't get to take advantage of multiple layers, allowing me to work on any part of the picture whenever I want. By doing this, it forces me to analyze the reference image in layers I have to make in order for the piece to turn out. I also have to be more careful with my brush strokes, because I could accidentally affect other areas of the painting if I don't. Which leads me to limitation number 2. Little to no undoing allowed. The only exceptions I allowed were if I made egregious mistakes with 1 or 2 strokes that I just made. This usually happened when my hand got a little jittery for whatever reason and messed up the line I was making. It happens sometimes. I decided to be nice to myself and allow small corrections for that. But as you'll soon see, if I got too deep into something before I realized I didn't like it, it was far, far too late to turn back, and I have to live with it. With the rules in place, I started each morning this week by finding a spot I liked and painting until I was done. Here's how it went. I really didn't have much of a plan when I first started this exercise beyond find something that looks decent and try to replicate it. I also had no real experience with the oil paintbrush I was using for every piece before I got started. That's probably why the first piece is understandably my roughest. I'll give myself points here for how cohesive the colors look. It reads like a cloudy day, which is nice. I also think I managed to pretty decently capture the layers of hills stretching into the distance. The transparency of the oil brush on a single layer made creating that foggy feel of things fading into the distance easy to achieve. But my lack of experience with the restrictions I placed on myself were definitely holding me back. It's a nice start, but there's not much to say about it. So, on to painting 2. Okay, full disclosure before I reveal this next piece, I really dislike where it ended. It was going so well until I decided to get fancy with my brush choices and, well, ruined the whole thing in my opinion. For this one, I found a nice lake with some rolling green hills as my reference. In the foreground, trees bordered the shot. I thought it was a nice composition, so I had at it. I started with everything in the background, since only one layer meant I had to work back to front. Here you can see I was getting better with the oil paintbrush already. I was varying up the width of the brush a lot more and successfully layering my colors to get some really nice effects. I was really happy with where it was going. Then I got to the trees. In the paintbrush section of my art program, I noticed a brush called pointillism, which is a style of painting that's basically just a lot of dots usually layered in such a way to create texture and color depth. Little dots could look like leaves, I thought to myself confidently. Why not break away from my oil brush and use that for the trees in the foreground? This is why. I tried so hard to turn this ship around when I realized it wasn't going the way I wanted. If this had been a real painting, the lower half would be a 1/4 inch thick with paint with how many layers I threw on this thing trying to force it into a more defined tree-like shape. All I got was the effect of seeing trees through frosted glass, and I'd covered a good chunk of that work I'd really been liking in the background. And, since I only worked on one layer and only realized how badly things were going after about 100 strokes, there was absolutely no way to get back to where I was without restarting. So, it stands as a reminder to me to keep my practices specific. No more veering off into other fancy brushes. It's me and the oil paintbrush from here on out. As I've been progressing through these pieces, I've predominantly been selecting colors by eye, meaning I'd look at the reference photo, estimate the color on my color picker, and use that. Once I'd done that, it gave me confirmation of a color theory that I'd heard and sort of internalized, but only in doing this exercise did I finally feel like I could talk about it with absolute confidence. Saturated colors don't exist on an artist's palette. When we look at the world, we see bright greens, vibrant reds, luminous yellows. You probably have a few particularly saturated colors around you right now on product packages or book covers. And yet, here's the thing. A lot of those colors aren't nearly as saturated as they look. On a square color picker, like what I use in my art program of choice, saturated colors are the ones to the furthest right of the square. They're super vibrant. Some could be described as loud with how bright they can be. Truly saturated colors kinda hurt your eyes when you look at them. But outside of your computer screen, you're actually not likely to encounter as many truly saturated colors as you expect. The reality is, many colors we see as bright and vibrant actually fall more to the left of the color square than you'd expect. This is usually due to the lighting in the area desaturating your tones. Take my second painting, for example. There are undeniably some very bright elements to this piece. It reads as a clear sunny day with vivid green leaves and a bright blue sky and lake. Yet, if I select any of the colors on my screen with the color picker, see where they land. I found the most vibrant spot of green on the tree leaves in front as an example. As you can see, even a color as bright as that still falls on the left half of the square. It's not saturated, it's bright. Watch what happens when I artificially pump up the saturation by just 50%. Brace yourselves, this might hurt to look at. I mean, the stuff in the background has a sort of charm to its colors, but the trees in the foreground look radioactive at this level of saturation. Now, if I go back to the original, it probably looks dull by comparison, but these colors are real. They're certainly much easier on the eyes to look at. This gets me to one of the top mistakes beginner artists make, choosing colors that are too saturated. It's a mistake that's easy to fall into as a digital artist when you see all those available colors and think you have to use them. Of course, there is a time and place for these colors. More cartoonish work can get away with saturated colors. Sometimes a single, cleverly implemented saturated element can be used to draw the eye, or a piece that plays with unrealistic colors can use saturated tones to pleasing effects. But the fact is, if you test out the colors of most artworks, especially ones vying for a more realistic effect, you're unlikely to find many, if any, truly saturated colors. This is something that takes practice. It's a skill to know how to pick and layer colors in a way to make them appear more luminous than they really are. But with practice, this becomes a lot easier to do without even realizing it. I certainly wasn't intentionally picking desaturated colors during this exercise. I just grabbed a color that looked right. And when all was said and done and I checked my work, I wasn't surprised to find that my color choices tended to stay to the left of the square. In fact, if I had to narrow down the square even more, I'd say 99% of my colors come from these areas. This newfound awareness of my color choices is really going to help me when I get back to my old work. I'll likely find that any dissatisfaction with my old color choices probably stemmed from using colors that were too saturated, which threw off the balance of the rest of the piece. I'll certainly be keeping it in mind going forward as I start picking out the new colors of my world. Moving on, for my third painting, I decided to throw in a little extra challenge. Landscapes are nice, but organic shapes are easy to make. No one will notice if a line isn't straight or a shape doesn't look right. Because with organic materials like trees and bushes, so long as you can nail the basics, you can get away with just about anything. That's not the case with inorganic shapes like buildings, however. If you mess up a square, it's a little easier for people to notice. Buildings have rigid structures. Any wonkiness in their design will be noticed as a mistake. I found a spot in the world with a nice little town nestled into the hills. It's a small part of the overall piece, but it still fulfills the requirement of including buildings. This is where it became clear that for as good as I was getting at making trees and mountains, I was heavily lacking in true refinement. I mean, it's definitely a little town over there, but it looks sloppy, and it sort of just sits on top of the hill as opposed to it being a clearly cohesive part of the hill. Everything else looks really nice. I'm particularly proud of the level of detail and texture I was managing to get on my trees and hills. This looks like somewhere now. The scale is much clearer thanks to the textures giving a sense for the size of the trees. But that little town was bothering me. I had proven I could draw trees and mountains, and now this clear gap in my skills was mocking me. That means for my next piece, it's time to make some buildings. I meandered the world for a while until I found a nice, seemingly easy street view to draw. I like the depth and the built-in color cohesion of all the buildings being made from the same materials while still having their own distinct elements to pick out. And then I ran into my one true weakness: perspective. Next to drawing hands or two symmetrical eyes, perspective is probably one of the major things you'll hear an artist say they're not good at. And with good reason. It's hard. A lot of tutorials show how, oh, it's just as simple as making a perspective grid and using that as a guide. Except it's not, and I'll die on this outer perspective hill. Perspective is both an art and a science. Yes, a guide helps, but no, it's not going to magically solve all of your problems, because the real world is messy. Outside of a city built on a grid structure, you'll be hard-pressed to find perfect examples of perspective. Perspective is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of practice to get even half decent at. The artists who make it look easy have been doing it for so long it's become easy for them. I am not one of those artists, which is why you should not look too closely at this one. I definitely achieved perspective to its most rudimentary degree. Just don't look too closely at the windows or it breaks the entire illusion. I removed some extra elements from this piece like cars and telephone wires to keep the piece simple, but I also think I pulled back a little too much on my colors. A lot of the colors in my reference were very similar and did visually blend together even in real life. But this is a time where maybe I should have pushed the envelope of reality a little to make the colors more distinct. It's still not bad. I mean, I can't really draw a straight line to save my life, and a perspective grid probably would have helped here. But going in with no digital assistance was part of the challenge, and boy did I make it one. I know a newsletter on perspective is inevitable, but I'm pushing it off because I just don't want to fry my brain on that topic yet. Let's move on to the final painting, and the one I'm most proud of. After a few days of diligent practice, it was the end of the week. Time for one final piece. I shied away from buildings for this one because I'd already decided it would be a focus topic for later. I let myself just find a landscape that I felt like painting, and boy did it turn out nice. You know, the fun thing about getting better at something is that you notice your speed increase. I probably spent roughly the same amount of time on this piece as I did my very first one, and yet the differences are stark. I've gotten way better at adding texture and color depth. My color choices are pretty good. That bright reddish-orange rock on the right has a brightest color that's only about halfway across the color square, and up against so many complementary blues and greens, it really pops out. I really like how the sky and lake turned out. The sky was a lot of work. The lake, surprisingly, less so, but it was easy to lose myself in adding lots of little textury directional lines to get that glassy ripple effect. I'd say the one thing I can improve on were the rocks I threw in the foreground. They were visible in the reference, and I could have simply omitted them to let the lake come all the way to the foreground, but I decided for realism. I've decided, based on how those foreground rocks turned out, that next week my focus is rocks. It's something I've been thinking about doing for a while anyway, and this motivated me. It's time to properly learn how to draw rocks. That took me to the end of my week. I was really happy with how much progress I made with just an hour or two of sitting at my desk each morning. I've been getting plugged a lot of YouTube videos about how intentional practice for an hour or two a day is better than just making yourself draw for 8, which I do have to agree with, especially since only working for a couple of hours a day has freed me up to pursue a handful of other projects I might talk about later. As I mentioned, next week I'm going to do something similar to this with the focus on learning how to draw rocks. So if you want to learn random things about rocks, tune in next week. Now for my real-life painting of the week. Digital art is fun and all, but traditional painting has been a whole other learning experience. It's week 2 with the fan brush. After trying and failing to break the conventions surrounding the use of fan brushes last week, I decided what I really needed to do was dial back. I should focus on doing one thing with the brush really well rather than doing 6 things just okay. One other thing I'd seen mentioned that fan brushes can be good for is hair. I've never tried painting hair before, and I can imagine how the blades of grass effect the fan brush is capable of could be translated into strands of hair. So I gave it a go. And here's what I can say about this piece. As far as using the fan brush goes, I think it went pretty well. It did exactly what I hoped it would, with flaring out nicely as I reached the end of my curves. And I settled into a good rhythm with making the grass where, since the fan brush is so wide and arced, I was able to put one color on one side of the brush and another color on the other side and quickly flip between them. Where I think I failed was in my composition and color choices. I stayed close to the canvas while working. Up close, there's a lot of nice detail, but as soon as you pull away, it all turns into mud. The fan brush is good for thin lines and small clumps, which it did nicely, but that means those small details are going to blur together the further you are from the piece. I also could have pushed my color differences a lot more, so that's on me. I thought it made sense to draw hair on grass so I could use the full extent of the brush, but maybe I should have chosen different colored hair or pushed the highlights and shadow of the grass more. It's something I'll keep in mind in the future. And with that, I honestly think I'm done with my single brush studies. I have a few other unique brushes I could use, but they're clearly for adding effects rather than being the primary brush. So going forward, I'll allow myself to use any brush, but I'll start focusing on effects. This will really start to refine my painting skills. I'm excited to see how it goes. And that's all for this week, gang. Thanks for listening.